Good morning. You're watching Business World Live. I'm Danie Laurel. It's the start of a new trading day. Let's kick off with our top story. Banks considered too big to fail have been ordered by the Bangko Sentral to submit concrete recovery plans starting 2022. That's amid uncertainties brought about by the pandemic. This move is seen to give the Bangko Sentral a more focused assessment of a bank's strategies to rebound from a crisis. The review will focus on a plan's robustness, credibility, and ability to be effectively implemented, according to a circular signed by Governor Bendiocno. Previously, so-called domestic systematically important banks have only been required to submit an internal capacity adequacy assessment process document where the recovery plan is already incorporated. The separate submission of the adequacy assessment document and the recovery plan will also align BSP supervision with international standards. That's according to BSP Managing Director Lynn Javier. The central bank does not disclose which banks are considered, quote, too big to fail, but it notes that if a lender falls under this category, its collapse could spill over to the financial system and the economy. Bankers Association of the Philippines President Jose Arnulfo Veloso welcomed the amendments to the existing rules, saying the BSP has further recognized the critical role of too big to fail banks in ensuring a long-term favorable condition post-COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, let's kick off with a very quick peek at the financial counter as they opened this Wednesday morning. You can see them down by 0.13%, just a couple in green this morning. That's Metro Bank and East West. Now, let's take a step back and check in on global equities. Now, this comes as the S&P 500 fell for a second straight day. That extends its slide. But of course, that comes from an all-time high. Investors are now showing caution ahead of the brunt of earnings season. Now, what happened there overnight? IBM reported the largest revenue growth in 11 quarters. However, United Airlines had a bigger than expected loss. Netflix as well plunged. That's as the first quarter subscriber growth was short of the average analyst estimates. You can also see European stocks slumping yesterday. Risk-off sentiment is abounding all around. You've got treasuries rallying, the dollar advancing, and oil prices as well retreating. Now, let's take a look at Asia. It does seem to be opening on the back foot as well. You've got the Nikkei 225 down already by 1.8%. Now, let's take a quick check at our own open 3 minutes into trade. We unfortunately have slid from that 6,500 level we finally broke into yesterday. We're back at 6487.88 following the rest of the region's declines down 0.2%. But this according to AAA Equities Chris Mangon. Yesterday, the market was finally in equilibrium as buyers and sellers balance each other out. But one exciting thing to be watching out for, of course, in the near term is the IPO that might be happening this year. That's as the SEC has greenlit Monde Nissin's IPO. That's going to be 17.9, close to 18 million common shares, actually. And that offering is going to be from May 17 to 21, while the listing will be at the end of May. So you might actually have our first IPO of 2021 on the end of May. That's going to be for 17 pesos and 50 centavos per share. Now, they're hoping to raise as much as 72.45 billion pesos if the whole over allotment is exercised, and they will be using the proceeds to fund their capex. That's for around 26.5 billion pesos, and the rest would be to fund the repayment of loans. And finally, just a quick peek on the telcos industry. You've got Globe Telecom reporting a 152% increase in the cell sites that it has built. You can see on my terminal here, Globe inching up by 1 point. They've reached 4G LTE and 5G, more than 7,000 sites just in the first 3 months of 2021. I recall that they're investing 70 billion pesos in those initiatives. This year, they had announced that their core income dropped by 13% in 2020 amid the pandemic. And interestingly, Converge as well, moving forward in that fiber space. Keppel has signed a binding term sheet with Converge when it comes to cable capacity. And they're going to be taking on the capacity on Trans-Pacific Bifrost cable system. They will be granting Converge an indefeasible right of use for one fiber pair on the main trunk of that Bifrost cable system that directly connects Singapore all over to North America. So that will branch into and land in Davao. The Philippines Converge will be investing around $100 million for that project that's expected to be completed in 2024. Converge jumping by 1.8% at the open. Now, here to chat with us about these market movements and more, we have with us Rob Ramos, RCBC Trust and Investments Group Head. Good morning, Rob, and welcome to the broadcast.
Good morning, Danie. Very nice to be here.
Rob, let's kick off a little bit broad here in terms of the index and then what we're seeing. A bit of a sideways sort of trade here. But are you feeling that there's more optimism, at least in the short term, given the fact that the vaccine rollout has been there? There's light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to the lockdowns, at least when we look towards May.
I think it's very important that we see things as put together. I mean, how our economy recovers, how our economy improves is, of course, connected to the vaccine rollout. The faster that these vaccines are rolled out, the faster our economy recovers. Personally, I see the 6.4, 6.3 level as a very strong support. I doubt it that we will talk unless there's really bad news or there's really going down this. Whereas in terms of my end-of-year projections, everything, assuming that the pace of the vaccine rollout is kept as it is, at the end we'll be seeing about that. If things are better, if things move out faster, the rollout probably increases in its pace, we may see 7,500 again.
Okay, so you still have between 7,000 to 7,500 and some upside risks here to your projection. Rob, very interestingly, we are comparing our markets to the rest of the global equities. And we've seen quite a rally, perhaps not across the board, but still in the US and China, which are two of our biggest, trading partners. Do you see this rally is spilling over into our domestic equities, or are you seeing a disconnect here?
First, I think if you look at Southeast Asia, a lot of the countries are doing a little better than us, or some of them are actually doing far better than us. And a lot of people are asking, why is that? If you look at the previous years, our GDP was surging versus theirs. But again, it boils down to the pace of the vaccine rollouts. Countries such as Taiwan, China, Malaysia, they're doing better because they're rolling up the enough. They're doing better because the vaccines are rolling out faster, and the sooner these are rolled out, the faster that they can be business as usual. Whereas for us, I think there's that big impediment. We cannot really go full on because we have to, of course, take into consideration the health of the public. We have to take into consideration what we can do while in this semi-lockdown. That being said, I do think that it's an interesting idea to invest in other markets. If you're looking at the US, although there was a slight drop, the trend, since 2019 is the upward trend. You're also looking at China, it's also moving upwards. It may be interesting for investors to have some investments in the Philippines because, of course, relatively at 6.3, 6.4, 6.5, it's relatively cheap. But if you look at the markets, the propensity, the prospects of growth are quite high.
Rob, you mentioned U.S. markets, enjoying quite an uptick here. We have here a chart of the S&P 500. Is it not already too late to be entering, especially since they've been euphoric, even throughout the pandemic, and now even more so? How can, Philippine investors understand when it's time to enter these offshore markets, particularly the S&P 500?
Well, it's quite interesting. If you actually look all the way back, I was thinking that it was a bit overdone in 2019. In 2019, it was much lower, and I was thinking these are all-time highs. Maybe they're bound for a retracement. But if you look, as you can see, that didn't happen. There was a slight drop during the pandemic, but since 2019, actually, you go back 2016, 2017, it's on the uptrend. So how do I see this? I see this as uncharted territory. I see this as individuals who are willing to invest in the bigger market. I see this as also an opportunity for some others. I think you're in a market that has not rolled out the vaccines as fast. Where do they go? In a market that is actually quite known, the US. So assuming that a lot of these countries, if you look at markets that haven't rolled out the vaccines as quickly and the growth prospects are relatively uncertain, it will probably go to the biggest market in the world, that's the US. And thus, with that with that perspective alone, I see it as more prospect for growth in the US market.
Okay, and what about the Asian markets? How do we distinguish which ones? Is it really just a matter of which one has the vaccine recovery or the vaccine story in place? That's the one that can actually, you should be entering into, or are there places like, the most undervalued indices right now compared to earnings? And how do we play that? And is our market, given that it hasn't rallied this much, actually a good place to be parking money? Given the fact that we haven't felt the same recovery as other Asian markets.
That's a very good point, Danie. I mean, if you look back the previous years, the play would always be looking for, potential for growth. You're looking at that play. That's still important. I would look at markets wherein there's a big drive to consume. So, given everything equal, I'd like to look at markets that have high population, that's high consumption. That's China is interesting. That's what made the Philippines so interesting for the longest time. Our demographic, we had a young population, and it's a growing population. So people within their same for several other countries get nothing particular. But now, that's still important that we go back to which economies will be 100% or at least close to it, given COVID-19, given the impacts. So then you look at things like, okay, how many countries have actually rolled out the vaccine? How many countries are on pace to finish the rollout within the year? How many countries will probably vaccinate 70% of their target within the year? So those things are now.
Okay, so exciting times here, uncharted territory when it comes to the U.S. market, despite the fact that they have been rallying. And of course, take a look at that vaccine story when you are looking at other indices, particularly those in the growth areas in Asia. Thank you so much for those insights. That was, of course, Rob Ramos from RCBC.
Thank you, Dan.
Check in on the biggest headlines. We are watching this Wednesday morning. Sales of imported cars nearly doubled in the month of March. It's on the back of a weak base, with March 2020 marking the beginning of the country's long lockdown. The Association of Vehicle Importers and Distributors, or AVID, said its 21 members sold over 5,000 units in March, a whopping 95% jump from a year earlier. Now, recall that in March 2020, the Luzon-wide lockdown shut down auto dealerships. And for the first quarter of 2021, total sales rose 9% year-on-year to the tune of almost 16,000 vehicle units sold. But month-on-month, sales still saw a decline of 4%. AVID President Fe Perez Agudo said imported car sales are expected to grow anywhere between 0 and 20% in 2021. That's depending on the government's final decision on safeguard duties on imported cars. Now, the Agriculture Department says fish supply and prices in the NCR Plus bubble have stabilized. Agriculture Secretary William Dar says this coincides with the peak season at the country's main marine fishing grounds. Now, between April 8 and 14, the total volume of marine fish catch unloaded at the Navotas Fish Port amounted to 3,760 metric tons. Dar says this is about 200 metric tons more than the previous week. The bulk of the supply consisted of galunggong, while the remaining were turay, tulingan, tamban, matambaka, and dalagang bukid, among others. The DA said these fish were sourced from Palawan, Zamboanga, and the Visayan Sea. Due to the increased supply, fish prices have also improved from 2020. Galunggong now costs from 180 to 240 pesos per kilo, tilapia at 120 to 130 pesos, and bangus at 180 pesos a kilo. That's a first look into the business day. Today's Wednesday, April 21st, 2021. Catch Business World Live for the market close. That's at 3:15 p.m. today. I'm Danie Laurel. Mask on, wash hands, and stay safe, Philippines. We are One News.